Okay, go.
Welcome everybody to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. I'm glad that we are finally together. The fault was mine. There's a two-step process here. One is that one sets it up on Zoom, and then one takes that information and transfer it to MailChimp, and then they mail it out. But in that transfer from Zoom to MailChimp, apparently I dropped off a number. So there should have been 6 numbers and there were 5. And then we tried different ways to remedy the problem. It took us a while to do that. So now we're ready to get started. I'm going to ask Warren to move at a deliberate pace. Don't shorten anything because we're starting half an hour late. We'll probably take a break about 10:30, then or 11:30, then come back and continue it. So it's important that we get the full benefit of Warren's preparation. I'm just looking here to see on the host participant list to see if Bob Ford is on. I don't see him, and that's too bad. Okay, it is now 10:55 and we begin. Well, I thought we would. So I looked up on Google for what are the best ecological verses in the Bible, and I didn't realize that they would be right on my smartphone. So I'll scroll down these, not read them all because some of them are quite familiar to us, but some aren't. So here's one from Genesis 1. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land, for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Actually, that's from Numbers 35. Proverbs 12, whoever is righteous has regard for the life of his beast, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. If you come across a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young one or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you, that you may live long. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. Just one or two more. I think, and wine to the gladdened heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. I'm not quite sure why they chose that one. Okay, this is from the last book of the Bible. The nations raged, but your wrath came, and the time for the dead to be judged, and for the rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. Destroying the destroyers of the earth. Let's pause for prayer. Dear God, we're so thankful that we can meet again. We're so thankful that Warren Trenchard is with us, given this matter of how we care for the environment, much careful study. And we pray that we will learn from him and learn from each other this morning. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, our guest is Dr. Warren Trenchard. He is skilled in 3 areas. He's a New Testament scholar, researcher. He's also a professor, educator, and also a very significant administrator. And so he comes to us with those 3 skills. This is a paper I spotted on his website, and I said to him, Warren, we need to hear that. So we've scheduled it. The first time we scheduled it, it didn't work out. This time it almost didn't work out again, but it has. So welcome, Warren. Take your time. We'll want to hear everything you have to say.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to share a screen. It looks like I have that capability according to this, but yeah. Do you see a blank PowerPoint screen?
Yes, it's blank.
Okay, all right. This should be less blank.
Yes.
Okay, just so I can see it properly. All right. I'm going to be talking about an Adventist theology of the earth in the light of the end time. This was the assignment to present this paper, which I delivered in a Bible conference, the fourth International Bible Conference, it was designated, in 2018. This was in Rome, Italy. This is sponsored by the General Conference Biblical Research Institute. And the theme of it was eschatology from an Adventist perspective. The paper is available, as Dave indicated, on my website, and I give the URL here. If you can't remember that, it's just simply, you can just Google Warren Trenchard, space in there, Warren Trenchard, and one of the top 1 or 2 items that comes up will be this website. You just go to the section Papers and Essays, and it is located there. So for that reason, I won't be particularly reading all the footnotes and the biblical references and so forth. They are all in the paper, and you can find them on the site. So this will save our time. The purpose of this paper is to propose an Adventist theology of the earth in the light of an impending end time. Before addressing the matter directly, I will review the traditional and contemporary positions of Christians in general and Seventh-day Adventist Christians in particular with respect to the theological aspects of ecological responsibility. For most of its history, Christianity has shown little interest in nature as anything other than the context in which humans live and the support system for their lives. Typically, Christians saw nature as something that God gave humans to dominate. They usually understood this dominion to be the right of exploitation. In this regard, Christians saw themselves different from those they considered pagans and from adherents of other, particularly Eastern religions that whose ties to nature are thoroughgoing and spiritual. On one occasion, a Christian missionary asked Gandhi what he wanted to achieve in the world. Gandhi replied, "To identify myself with all creation." The missionary left disappointed. In the last third of the 20th century, many writers began to blame the present environmental crisis on the formative impact of Western Christian theology and ethics on the development of science and technology and the resulting industrial revolution. The germinal study in this regard was published by Lynn White in 1967. In this oft-quoted essay, White argued that, quote, "Our present science and our present technology are tinctured with Orthodox Christian arrogance toward nature." For White, each such Christianity, therefore, quote, "bears a huge burden of guilt for the present ecological crisis." Eastern Christians, non-Christians, Aboriginal peoples, and New Agers are often seen as more committed to environmental responsibility than Western Christians. In the last 30 years, Christian theologians and other writers have begun to seriously address this issue, not only acknowledging, like Sentmeyer, the ambiguous nature of Christian theology and its heritage in this regard, but also exploring ways that contemporary Christian theology and ethics can creatively foster environmental responsibility and renewal. Even White acknowledged a minority tradition in Christianity that showed concern for the natural world. This has typically been associated with Francis of Assisi, whom White proposed as a patron saint for ecologists. If Francis is the patron saint of ecology, his Canticle of Brother Sun is its doxology. One of Santmeyer's concerns in his book, Travail of Nature, is to document this early minority tradition with particular reference to Irenaeus and Augustine of Hippo. No longer is Christian stewardship being seen merely as faithfulness in the giving of tithes and offerings. Unfortunately, we have recently seen something of a reversal of this progress by Christians in the United States, especially among evangelicals. This has appeared in the latter's uncritical support for and endorsement of not only the general policies of the present executive branch of the federal government. Remember, this paper was delivered in 2018, but especially its stance and actions concerning the environment. These have included things like the renewal of offshore petroleum drilling and support for fracking, the rejection of the Paris Agreement, the approval of major pipeline projects, and the revitalization of the coal mining industry. Seventh-day Adventists, like most Christians, have historically showed little interest in environmental matters. In 2018, Joanne Davidson wrote in the Adventist Review, Christians have been slow to respond to ecological concerns. Unfortunately, even the Seventh-day Adventist Church often neglects to link our theology with ecology. The traditional fascination of Adventists with nature is not based on any developed theology of the natural world. Rather, it is associated with commitment to health and the belief that time spent in nature will positively affect the, I need to scroll through my paper here, positively affect mind, body and spirit. One notable exception of this, of course, was the radical pantheism of John Harvey Kellogg and others with its virtual deification of nature. For Ellen White, nature seemed important largely for its educational and restorative values. She did not have a doctrine of environmental responsibility, yet she did offer some insights that are fundamental to an Adventist theology of the earth. In a generic way, she spoke of, quote, the unity of man with nature. While her numerous references to stewardship consistently refer to the wise management of finances and abilities, she occasionally viewed stewardship in a somewhat broader sense. Even when discussing financial stewardship, she sometimes wrote of the more general responsibility of humans as God's stewards. In perhaps her most specific consideration of an ecological theme, Ellen White wrote on the treatment of animals, albeit in 19th century terms. She wrote, for few realize, as they should, the sinfulness of abusing animals or leaving them to suffer from neglect. He who created man made the lower animals also, and his tender mercies are over all his works. The animals were created to serve man, but he has no right to cause them pain by harsh treatment or cruel exaction. It is because of man's sin that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together. Suffering and death were thus entailed not only upon the human race, but upon the animals. Surely then it becomes man to seek to lighten instead of increasing the weight of suffering, which his transgression has brought upon God's creatures. He who will abuse animals because he has them in his power is both a coward and a tyrant. A record goes up to heaven, and a day is coming when the judgment will be pronounced against those who abuse God's creatures. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets. Here, Ellen White links God's creation of humans and animals and notes the human sin brought suffering and death to both. While negatively impacting their earthly environment, humans are to care for the needs of animals and not to abuse them. Such abuse is cowardly and sinful and will result in divine judgment upon the perpetrators. About 1970, Seventh-day Adventist authors first began to address the issue of Christian responsibility for the conservation and renewal of the earth. These include discussions of the growing ecological crisis, efforts at developing an environmental conscience among Adventists, and insights on the relationship between theology and ecology. Probably the first was Jonathan Butler's piece in 1970 in Insight magazine. And in 1993, 23 years later, the entire volume number 22, the winter issue of Spectrum magazine, was thematically devoted to the topic of ecology and contained a collection of articles on the subject. That was probably the first comprehensive set of such pieces. While some writers featured a few elements of Adventist theology, no one has developed a distinctively Adventist theology of the earth. One of the first, I think, embryonic attempts was that of Joe Grigg in Adventist Review, 1990, in which he focused particularly on the Sabbath. Joanne Davidson's work I mentioned earlier is notable in this regard. And of course, Siegfried Tonsted's commentary on the letter, Paul's letter to the Romans, viewed from an ecological point of view, certainly take some steps in this direction. A couple of scientists, Fred and William Hayes, in 2014, prepared a biology textbook that served as a source book for dealing with ecological responsibility in the teaching of science. As we might expect, several see the Sabbath as a time for not only celebrating the Creator, but also reminding us of our environmental responsibilities. And I think in this regard, of course, of the work of Samuel Bakioki, Divine Rest for Human Restlessness, 1980, Barry Casey's article in Spectrum, 1983, Cheryl Prince McMillan, writing in the Adventist Review in 1996, and the second edition of Rick Rice's The Reign of God addresses this as well in his publication in 1997. Various organizations have conducted conferences on the theme of Adventist and ecology. For example, in 1993, the Andrews, now Adventist, Society for Religious Studies devoted its annual meeting to the topic of Adventist and environmental responsibility. The Women's Resource Center at La Sierra University hosted the second annual Young Women and the Word 09 with the conference theme Adventist Women and the Earth, a response to ecofeminism. This was in 2009. Loma Linda University sponsored a conference on Entrusted, Christians and Environmental Care in 2013. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has also issued several official declarations on environmental issues. In 1980, the church issued a statement on stewardship with a reference to the earth and its resources. In the list of fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, this material was first found. However, despite its inclusion in of this phrase, the statement is thoroughly money-oriented. Subsequently, the Ministerial Association published a book enlarging on these fundamental beliefs, which discusses this particular belief statement and has a little small section on the question of ecological responsibility. The first comprehensive official statement by the church on the subject was voted by the annual Council of the General Conference in 1992. Theologically, the statement is distinctly Adventist only in its reference to the Sabbath as emphasizing, quote, the importance of our integration with the total environment. Philosophically, it is anthropocentric. Politically, it supports the concept of sustainable development. In 1995 and 96, the church issued 3 additional statements relating to Adventists and the environment. These statements were voted by the General Conference Administrative Committee. 2 are almost identical statements indicating that humans are stewards of, quote, the natural environment, end quote, and that they have badly failed in this responsibility. The third statement discusses climate changes caused by industrialized countries and calls for governments to take specific political actions. All 3 end with a similar paragraph that describes the commitment of Seventh-day Adventists to environmental responsibility. This paragraph read, Seventh-day Adventists advocate a simple, wholesome lifestyle where people do not step on the treadmill of unbridled consumerism, goods getting, and production of waste. We call for respect of creation, restraint in the use of the world's resources, reevaluation of one's needs, and reaffirmation of the dignity of created life. The number of Adventist publications and pronouncements on the topic of environmental responsibility is impressive. However, most are short, incomplete statements of the issue. Furthermore, none attempts to set out a comprehensive Adventist theological position. It is time for Adventists to move beyond this consciousness raising and unstructured theological musing, as important and necessary as these have been. Adventists need to focus these scattered ideas into a comprehensive and systematic theology of environmental responsibility, a theology that is not only Christian, but uniquely Adventist, an Adventist theology of the earth. This is something that Fritz Guy recognized as a need when he was writing his book, Thinking Theologically. And he referred he mentioned that among the major subjects, this so far has received only minimal and preliminary Adventist attention, but deserves more. At another point in an article that he wrote, he suggested we could develop a theology of ecology. So this has been on the minds of some people for a while. Unless they engage in this task, Seventh-day Adventists in general will not take the issue seriously. Some will practice ecological responsible actions such as paper and glass recycling and water conservation for social or political reasons. A few will do such because of religious convictions. Most will continue to live with little or no regard for the status or fate of the environment. However, there will be no general movement of Adventists toward responsible ecology unless and until they have a well-developed theological basis for such behavior. Furthermore, without such a developed theology, Adventists will not be taken seriously by others in the Christian world and beyond. Therefore, as an initial step in this direction, I propose that Seventh-day Adventists develop an Adventist theology of the earth within a paradigm of 5 affirmations and 2 symbols. While none of these affirmations or symbols is entirely unique to Adventism, the assemblage is particularly characteristic of Seventh-day Adventist thought and practice. The 5 affirmations reflect a trajectory of cosmic time that is central to Adventist theology. A temporal expanse from creation to recreation, from Eden to eternity. and from quote, in the beginning, end quote, to the eschaton. Adventists sometimes have called this the drama of the ages, or expressed more negatively, though with an anticipated positive outcome, the great controversy, or the cosmic conflict. The first affirmation concerns creation. God created and sustained the physical world and all its systems and its human, animal, and plant life. The foci of this affirmation is God, the engaged creator, God's comprehensive and magnificent creative achievements, God's satisfaction with the results, and God's partnership with humans in creative activities and in the preservation of the created order. The narrative in Genesis 1 describes a progressive emergence of order from a state of watery, dark chaos. At the word of God, light dispels darkness, firmament separates water, land further divides the water and produces plants. Special lights appear in the firmament. Creatures emerge in the firmament and in the water, and animals spring forth on the land. This culminates in the creation of creatures in the image of God, male and female humans. To these humans, God gave dominion or trusteeship over all the creation. At each stage, God saw the outcome was good. In a final summary assessment of this creation, the writer observed, God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. The writer of Genesis 2 describes God's creation from a different perspective. This primordial chaos was a desert-like cosmos without plants or animals. Water came from the ground. Then God made the body of a creature from the soil and activated it with life, producing a human being. God next put this human into the environmental setting that he was to protect, but with limitations that he was not to exceed. Similarly, God proceeded to create every tree that is pleasant in the sight and good for food, and every animal of the field and every bird of the air out of the soil. God shared the creation process with this human by having him give names to all the animals. From the male human, God created a female counterpart. Together, these stories convey several important insights that must be part of an Adventist theology of the earth in the context of the affirmation of creation. One, the God of the Hebrew scriptures is the source of all the physical universe and its systems and life forms, particularly the humans, plants, and animals of the earth. Two, God intentionally brought the earth and its creatures into being. Three, God was overwhelmingly satisfied with this creation, declaring it to be very good. Four, humans, plants, and animals share a common physical relationship to the earth, to the soil itself. Five, humans are not dualistic entities, but are monistic beings that exist only when life is combined with their physical bodies. Six, God made humans to be like God, at least in part by involving them in the creation process and by making them responsible for the well-being and protection of the physical world with its plants and animals. Seven, God made humans with physical, rational, spiritual, and spatial dimensions. Eight, in creation, God established an order of authority and relationships of responsibility with limitations. Nine, humans and animals are dependent on the plants of the earth for food and thus the continuation of life. Accordingly, Adventist Christians who affirm the doctrine of creation will acknowledge God's ownership of the earth and all its life forms, the inherent goodness of all aspects of God's creation, their common relationship among the plants and animals of the physical world, the goodness and necessity of their bodies and all bodily functions, their assignment as trustees or stewards of the well-being of the earth and all its life forms, their spatial dimension, as part of the holistic understanding of human life and the order of human authority and limitations with regard to the earth. The second affirmation concerns deterioration. Human rebellion against God resulted in the degradation of the physical world and all its human, animal, and plant life. The initial source material that supports this affirmation is the narrative in Genesis 3. This fundamental story narrates the origin of sin and evil in the world. The narrator links this story to that of Genesis 2 by describing how the recently created humans rationally decided to exceed the boundaries of the divinely imposed limitations. One of the animals helped to facilitate this rebellion by creating doubt and distrust of God. The humans were beguiled and immediately felt shame and fear toward God and alienation and blame toward each other. After searching for the hiding pair and finding them, God told them of the consequences of their choice and actions. Everyone and everything involved would suffer a result. The snake would be humiliated and crushed by the woman's offspring, even while biting his heel. The woman would suffer pain and humiliation. The man would experience the difficulty of extracting food from the earth. The earth itself would become hostile to the human life and eventually claim humans in death. Finally, God further extended the boundaries of limitation of humans by removing them from their original pristine habitat. Yet God intervened to provide clothing of animal skins to help protect the humans from the hostile environment and left the restricted tree of life as a symbol of hope. This story conveys several insights that must be part of an Adventist theology of the earth. One, even during the time of deterioration, humans are still dependent on the physical world with its animals and plants for life. Two, stewardship of the earth is even more important because humans must now work harder to care for the earth. Three, the spiritual, mental, physical, and spatial dimensions of humans are all negatively affected by the human rebellion. Four, the ultimate result of deterioration is death, which for humans means non-existence. Five, even in deterioration, God provided hope. And so accordingly, Adventist Christians who affirm the doctrine of deterioration will acknowledge that humans are still dependent on the earth for the continuation of life, that they are now even more responsible to God and themselves for the care of the earth and its life-sustaining elements, that the spatial, along with other dimensions, have suffered because of human rebellion, that they will die and no longer exist, and that their only hope for ultimate life resides in God. Sorry, I'm trying to manage a paper and this PowerPoint thing and a slow computer. Here we go. Some reason this is not the day for technology, apparently. Okay, the third affirmation concerns salvation. God, in the form of Jesus Christ, provided for the end of the deterioration of the physical world and all its human, animal, plant life, and for their ultimate restoration. The glimmer of hope contained in the foundational story of deterioration and subsequent biblical material was fanned into a burning torch of expectation in the history of God's communications and interventions in the lives of the Hebrew people and recorded in their scriptures. However, it was not until the incarnation of God into humanity itself that the full blaze of divine revelation and fulfillment burst on the human scene after millennia of deterioration. This is an affirmation of the saving act of God in and through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. The first to write an interpretation of Jesus and his meaning for the salvation of humans and their world was Paul of Tarsus, a Hellenistic Jewish convert to the Jesus movement. Later, other writers gave their own accounts and interpretations of Jesus, especially those who composed composed what eventually came to be called the Gospels. In particular, the Gospel writers provided extensive accounts of Jesus' teachings and supernatural activities, edited to convey the meaning of Jesus for various groups of Christians in different parts of the Hellenistic world. The stories, discourses, expositions, and interpretations of these writers convey several important insights that must be part of an Adventist theology of the earth in the context of the affirmation of salvation. One, Jesus' incarnation shows God's solidarity with deteriorated humans and their world. Two, Jesus' death showed God's love for deteriorated humans and their world, as Jesus experienced death, the ultimate effect of human deterioration. Three, Jesus' resurrection showed God's power over the effects of deterioration on humans and their world. In this regard, God defeated death by raising Jesus from the dead. Jesus defeated the hostile cosmic powers through his resurrection. Four, the good news is that in Jesus, God saved the whole world and all its people, and that to be saved, those who rebelled against God need only believe in Jesus and accept this good news. Five, God saves humans holistically, including their spiritual, mental, physical, and spatial dimensions. Accordingly, Adventist Christians who affirm the doctrine of salvation will acknowledge that Jesus came in deteriorated human form to show God's solidarity with humans and their world, that Jesus demonstrated his power over the hostile forces of nature and human diseases and death, that Jesus proclaimed the beginning of God's renewed administration of the world, that Jesus died to demonstrate the depth of God's love for deteriorated humans and their world, that God defeated death and the cosmic powers by raising Jesus from the dead, that deteriorated humans may experience salvation by believing in Jesus and accepting the good news that God has saved the world and all people, and that God's salvation involves all the human dimensions, including the spatial dimensions of the earth. The fourth dimension of the five that we are considering is anticipation. God, in the form of the Holy Spirit, provides the first installments of the restoration of the physical world and all its human, animal, and plant life. This affirmation focuses on the interim period in salvation history between the definitive acts of God in the death and resurrection of Jesus and the completion of that history in the future restoration to occur in association with the second advent of Jesus. This comes after the defeat of death and the cosmic powers by Jesus through his death and resurrection, but before their destruction. It lies between the already and the not yet aspects of the kingdom of God, between its inauguration and its consummation. It is the time between the definitive battle and the end of the war, as certain theologians after the Second World War characterized this phenomenon. During this interim, believers in Jesus have both privileges and responsibilities. According to the New Testament, they are privileged to have hope and confidence in God's future restoration because of what God has already done in Jesus. They can even face death with confidence in a future bodily resurrection because God raised Jesus from the dead. They are also privileged to begin experiencing in advance some important aspects of that restoration. Physically, they can even now know that they have eternal life and start to experience the quality of endless existence by a health-conscious lifestyle. Spiritually, they can begin to undergo a significant, though incomplete, transformation. That is what the New Testament writers variously describe through metaphors like justification, sanctification, redemption, reconciliation, adoption, expiation, forgiveness, and salvation. Intellectually, believers can develop their own minds toward greater depths of understanding, even if short of perfect knowledge. However, such experiences in advance would be incomplete if they did not also include the fourth dimension of holistic humanity, the spatial dimension. Accordingly, Paul declares that the earth itself languishes in its deteriorated state and eagerly anticipates its restoration. While God has promised to recreate the physical world in the future, believers may even now begin not only to prepare for that restoration, but also to live an environmentally conscious and active lifestyle. Sorry, I've lost my place again. During the interim, accordingly, Adventist Christians who affirm the doctrine of anticipation will acknowledge that during the interim between God's salvation event in Jesus and God's future restoration, they are privileged through the Holy Spirit to have hope and confidence in the ultimate restoration of the deteriorated earth and all its life forms, and to experience in advance some important aspects of that restoration, including the proleptic restoration of their spatial dimension in the physical world. They will also acknowledge that during the interim, they have responsibilities to perform that include informing others of God's coming restoration of the earth and its commencement already, and to work diligently to help bring it about by tangible acts of restraint, reuse, and renewal with respect to the earth and its resources. This leads us then to the fifth dimension, and this is not a contemporary rock group. The fifth dimension, which concerns restoration. God will restore the physical world and its human, animal, and plant life to their pristine state for eternity. This affirmation focuses on the goal of salvation history and the climax of the cosmic drama. It looks to an event in that drama that is yet to come. However, its certainty is established by God's historical act of salvation in Jesus and by the first installments of the restoration in the activity of the Spirit in the present time of anticipation. Even during the time of deterioration, before the act of God in Jesus, God had promised to create new heavens and a new earth. God repeated this promise to the followers of Jesus, who himself had spoken of the end of the present heaven and earth. The restoration of the earth and its celestial environment will be comprehensive. Humans will be restored holistically to endless physical life, their perfect spiritual relationships with God and to each other, to unlimited intellectual achievement, and to perfect spatial environment. Animal and plant life will be restored to perfect harmonious existence. The earth itself will be restored to its pristine state. All that has been negatively affected by rebellion against God will be made perfect. Spiritually, I'm sorry, find my place here again. This restoration of the earth and its celestial environments will be comprehensive. All that has been negatively affected by the rebellion against God will be made perfect in restoration. However, this is more than merely a zero-sum prospect. The restoration will bring humans and their world to a state even beyond their original condition. For humans, this means a degree of understanding God's love that was never possible before the rebellion and God's act of salvation in Jesus. For the earth, it means a level of God's presence that was not characteristic even of the world after creation. The first followers of Jesus described in the New Testament were apocalypticists. They shared the basic worldview of contemporary Jews that spiritual and social deterioration of their world and its society had reached such disastrous levels that only God's direct intervention could change things. God would bring the present world and its history to a dramatic end and would replace it with a new world. There would be a judgment of human behavior, and only those vindicated as followers of God would enter the new world. Through an end-time resurrection, these would include the believers who had died. If taken in isolation from other affirmations, an apocalyptic understanding of the restoration would usually lead to a depreciation of a positive theology of the earth. According to the typical apocalyptic theology, God will replace the present world with a new one. Therefore, inhabitants of the present world may feel no responsibility to protect or preserve the present world. However, as we have seen, in the final part of the trajectory of affirmations that span the time and stages from eternity, from Eden to eternity, belief in God's dramatic recreation of the earth becomes the ultimate catalyst for a theology of the earth. God made the earth and everyone and everything on it perfect. The consequences of human rebellion against God brought about the deterioration of the earth and all its human and other life forms. In Jesus, God achieved salvation for humans in the world and made restoration possible by defeating the powers of evil and rebellion. Through the Holy Spirit, believers in Jesus now live in anticipation of future restoration. The final affirmation of restoration of humans in the earth is the capstone of this trajectory. This is apocalyptic in that God will dramatically terminate the history of human rebellion and all the consequences of deterioration, and will comprehensively restore everything to its original pristine state. The bodily resurrection of believers in Jesus who die before his return will be a significant means of linking the old world and earth with the new. It will also confirm the monistic understanding of reality and ultimate goodness of matter in God's creation. Once again, humans will be linked in solidarity with the earth. These resurrected believers, along with others, will continue to depend on the earth for life. This is figuratively implied in the resurrection story, which in reminiscence of the second creation account describes a tree of life beside the, quote, river of water of life. Accordingly then, Adventist Christians who affirm the doctrine of restoration will acknowledge that after the return of Jesus, God, who brought about the earth and all its human and other life forms into perfect existence, will fully restore them from the comprehensive deterioration they've experienced. That believers in Jesus who have died will live again through resurrection of the physical body, and that matter and material world will continue to be positively part of the divine plan, and that humans will still depend on the life and its restored and its resources for continued existence. And so we come to the two symbols then that I think are inherent in Adventist thought that I think contribute to an Adventist theology of the earth. While contemporary Adventism is more well known for the first of these two symbols, as we'll see, the second is actually more foundational in Adventist history. Furthermore, the first is better understood and accepted by most Adventists today. Nevertheless, the second, although controversial, remains an important motif in Adventist thought. These symbols contribute to an Adventist theology of the earth in conjunction with the five affirmations. The first symbol is, as you might expect, Sabbath. God rested as an example to humans and gave them the Sabbath as a special interlude in ordinary time. It is their day to rest from work, recover from stress, contemplate and worship God, enjoy fellowship with family and friends, and experience renewal for the following week. Sabbath is a symbol related to creation. The first creation narrative climaxes with the introduction of the Sabbath as the crowning act of the Creator. God rested, not from fatigue at creating. How tired can one get by giving a single order on each of 6 days? But in satisfaction at the outcome of the creation. It was good, and God celebrated. Because God made humans God-like, they too would rest in celebration of the perfect creation with all of its wondrous life forms and its glorious physical environment. It was to be their special time to remember and worship the Creator and to recall their privileges and responsibilities regarding God's world. Sabbath is a symbol related to deterioration. When humans rebelled, God instituted another functional symbol to remind them of their state of alienation from Him and their fate of death. He informed the rebelled humans that they would have to work to survive. Not a pleasant, leisurely effort, but labor that would be difficult, demanding, and exhausting. This is the opposite of rest, which a Sabbath represents. Yet, even in the setting of rebellion and continuum of labor, the Sabbath was a reminder to humans of the glorious creation of the past and the promise of restoration in the future. In the context of deterioration, God gave laws to humans, including regulations concerning the Sabbath. Humans were told to rest from work in celebration of God's creation and to share the rest with everyone and everything in their households, including their employees, guests, and animals. Even the land was to have a renewing Sabbath rest from production every 7 years. If God's special people failed to grant the land this rest, they would be punished with deportation, and the land would eventually get its Sabbath rest anyway. Sabbath is a symbol related to salvation. Ancient Israel understood the Sabbath as a reminder of the deliverance from Egypt and of God, who could make them holy. As an act of restoration from the physical deterioration that resulted from human rebellion, Jesus healed on the Sabbath and defended his actions. He declared the Sabbath as a gift from God for humans while defending his disciples' right to eating casually plucked and life-sustaining grain on the Sabbath. Furthermore, sorry, lost my place here again in this malfunctioning computer here. He declared that furthermore, he used the concept of Sabbath-like rest from work to describe figuratively the saving renewal that he brought to deteriorated humans. Finally, Jesus rested in the earth on the Sabbath during the time of his death and before his resurrection. The apostle to the Hebrews used the metaphor of entering God's rest for the experience of salvation, an experience that ultimately eluded ancient Israel, but is experienced by all who believe in Jesus. Because God saves humans holistically including their spatial dimensions. The Sabbath, as a commemoration of that salvation, likewise memorializes the saving of the earth itself. Sabbath as a symbol of, and is also a symbol of anticipation. While Sabbath provides rest for the work of the past 6 days, it also brings renewal for the experiences of the next week. It is an interim between past and future, a time to remember and a time to anticipate. It is therefore an appropriate symbol for believers in Jesus who live in the reality of his past act of salvation and in the certainty of his future coming to restore. The Sabbath rest is a foretaste of that restoration. Since the restoration will be comprehensive, the foretaste of it should be as well. Thus, Sabbath is both a reminder of the future restoration of the earth and all its human and life forms, and a time to share the good news and to do tangible things to help bring these things about. Sabbath is a symbol of restoration. In the new earth envisioned by Isaiah, restored humans will worship God each Sabbath. The comprehensive restoration of everything that deteriorated because of human rebellion, including the earth itself, is a Sabbath-like rest that awaits both restored humans and their earth. So accordingly, Adventist Christians, there we go. Sorry, this thing is just jumping around unreasonably. I'm sorry for that. Okay. Please forgive me. I just cannot get back to my place here. Well, let me go to the final thing. I won't take more time on this. The second symbol is sanctuary. God has a presence among humans. This suggests that God considers not only humans to be important, but also values their physical environment. Furthermore, God is serious about humans and the roles and responsibilities they've received, including their responsibilities regarding the well-being of the earth and its life forms. In the end, God's seriousness involves what the Bible calls a judgment, and what humans are, and that humans are held accountable for the discharge of their God-given responsibilities, and in which they are vindicated because of their belief in Jesus. Sanctuary is a symbol related to creation. The creation accounts in Genesis picture God as intimately involved in his creation, contemplating, making, forming, planting, instructing, resting. God shares the creation process with humans by involving them in naming things. The text describes God like an estate owner walking around the property at the end of the day. God was serious about regarding the care of the earth and gave responsibilities to humans regarding it. Sanctuary is a symbol also of deterioration. While human rebellion affected God's relationship to the world, it did not eliminate God's presence in it. God was present in the experiences of personal worship and devotion, and eventually among a particular group of people. The physical locus of that presence was a sacred tent that in time was placed by a permanent shrine in Jerusalem, one that God shared even with nesting and singing birds. God's seriousness about human responsibility, including the care of the earth, and a means of vindication were centered in the religious events of ancient Israel, especially on the annual Day of Atonement. Oh, here we go again. I'm trying to move these pages around. Sorry. I should have printed this out and just read it in front of me, but I thought this would work. Anyway.
We're fine, Warren. We're not going anywhere.
Okay, just give me a second here. I've got so many things open on this computer that it's gotten extremely slow, and I just cannot move around here. Okay, Sabbath is a symbol related to salvation. The third affirmation, God's definitive act of salvation involved the incarnation of divinity into humanity in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, as we've seen. According to the opening hymn of the fourth gospel, this word became flesh and lived among us. God was with us. God came to share the human spatial dimension, not only in the by living in the world of material things, but also by sharing the human physical reality. Jesus taught humans to entrust the care of their most important needs to God, who provides for the birds, flowers, and grass. Sanctuary is a symbol related to anticipation. God's presence in the world during the interim between the act of salvation in Jesus and the restoration at Jesus' return is in the form of the Holy Spirit, as we've seen. The Spirit is a reminder of the historical presence of Jesus in the past and a first installment of the physical presence of God in the future. The Spirit leads believers to the truth about God's seriousness and points to the time of judgment when God will hold humans responsible for their actions, including their sins against the earth. Sanctuary is a symbol related to restoration. The ultimate achievement of restoration will be sanctuary. God will again dwell with humans in a restored earth, according to the biblical text. Only then will the presence of God be fully realized since creation and the interlude of human rebellion. The ultimate presence of God will transform the natural world into a place fitting not only for restored humans, but for a perfect God. Okay. All right. If I can get the final paragraph of this section up. Okay, here we go. Accordingly, Adventist Christians will embrace the symbol of sanctuary. You will note that I'm not using an article in front of this, the sanctuary. I'm not presenting this in terms of the doctrine of the sanctuary, but simply as a doctrine of sanctuary, which I'm defining as the presence of God. So in that context, again, let me read this. Accordingly, Adventist Christians who embrace the symbol of sanctuary will acknowledge that from the beginning of creation, God has been present in and identified with the earth and all its human and other life forms. That God's presence continues to grace the earth after humans rebelled. That God's presence reaches its climax in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That humans and the earth continue to experience God's presence in the form of the Holy Spirit. That God's presence with humans and the earth will be complete when all things are restored to their pristine perfection, and that God will hold humans accountable for how they have fulfilled their responsibilities for the earth. And so in summary, in recent years, Christians in general have begun to develop creative theologies of the earth, ecology, and environmental responsibility. Seventh-day Adventist Christians need to do the same. Adventists have produced an admirable number of official statements, educational materials, journal articles, books, and scholarly investigations, and conducted several conferences on ecological topics from an Adventist perspective. However, there remains the need for a comprehensive and systematic theology of the earth that draws on distinctive Adventist theological and biblical insights. This paper has taken a preliminary step in that direction. I have proposed a paradigm for an Adventist theology of the earth that is based on 5 affirmations of the Adventist doctrine of the great controversy: creation, deterioration, salvation, anticipation, and restoration, and 2 characteristic Adventist symbols, Sabbath and sanctuary. I assert that such a theology of the earth is both complementary to an Adventist eschatology and necessary for it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Warren. And again, I apologize for the difficult way in which you began. This is very, very interesting. I have never heard the idea of sanctuary used in this respect. And I think it's exactly right. The sanctuary is an indication of God's incarnation in our lives. And to draw on that for ecological purposes is, I think, very promising way to go. Also with the symbol of the Sabbath, along with the 5 characterizations of our doctrines that would matter. Now, let's take a break, and we'll take our 10 minutes as usual. And when we come back, I have 2 very different kinds of questions. One is, where do we need to press this issue a little more theologically? One of them, I think, is that we need to hear more from Warren about sanctuary and how this relates to ecology. Secondly, we really do need to press hard on this idea of the second coming of Jesus eviscerating our ecological energy. No Seventh-day Adventist is going to say, because Jesus is coming back soon, we can do anything we want to the environment. Other Christians have said that. I've never heard an Adventist say anything like that. So the issue is not that one for us, in my view. The issue is a matter of priorities. To what extent are we willing to make environmental concerns a high-profile priority in our denomination, akin, let's say, to religious liberty, where we have created the Religious Liberty Association, or akin to temperance, as we have created the American Temperance Society. We have taken on those 2 causes, temperance and religious liberty, and we have said, these are among the priorities that are so high for us that we are willing to fund them and support them and so forth. What would it take to make environmental concerns a 3rd one? Okay, religious liberty, temperance, and ecological endeavors. 3rd one, that's, I think, where we need to be going, and how can we accomplish that? So theological questions and then practical questions when we come back. It is now what time for us?
Well, it looks like it's 12 o'clock. Well, it's 5 after. Let's come back at 15 after.
Very good. So we will see you at 15 minutes after 12 noon. Thank you. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, everybody.
And here we go. There we go. David, we're on.
Okay, over to you. You have a cue. I think Robert, Ford, and McKinley, Eddie, were starting a good conversation. Maybe they want to pick it up here once we reconvene. Maybe there are others who would like to get involved as well. I really want at some point to come back to the practical question. What can we do about this to bring it to the level of religious liberty and temperance? After all, we don't say, because Jesus is coming back soon, we don't care about religious liberty. We don't say we don't care about temperance. but we have created societies to help us out on that, which include people who aren't members of our own community of faith. So over to you, Forrest.
Okay, Bob, why don't you you and McKinley kind of get back into this discussion you were talking about, I think it was systems.
Yes. For those of us, well, first of all, I'd say I really appreciated Warren's bringing in the spatial dimension. I'm a geographer by training, so that my ears really pricked up when he talked about that. And so at some point, I'd like to maybe ask him more about that. But for those of us, I'm trained as what they call a cultural ecologist that looks how humans interact with the environment in a broader thing. And what we tend to look at, and engineers do this as well, is systems and how systems interact with each other, whether it be, material systems or air or energy systems, and then how cycling occurs in systems and what makes a healthy system and so on, whether we're looking at but then there are questions that always come up that I find hard to deal with. In a good functioning, say, savanna system with animals and grass and so on, you have predation, you have death, you have cruelty. If healthy animals didn't predate on other animals, and if you didn't have all of this going on, you would have a dying ecosystem. So how do Christians deal, Adventist Christians, with the whole concept of cycling, decay, growth, change, in ecological systems? And how do we look at that in terms of our understanding of a creator God who created supposedly perfect systems? So are the systems wrong today? Did something go wrong? Why do we have to have predation if you're going to have healthy systems? So I'd start there as a kind of my point.
Warren, do you have a response to that?
Certainly nothing normative or authoritative. This is not my area of particular investigation, but I am aware of the issue, and I've often thought about this. We don't have a lot of, and I'm not necessarily wanting to argue here to the issue of historical reality, scientific reality, and so forth behind everything that I've been talking about. But I should characterize this for what it is, first of all, and then maybe I can talk about this a little bit. When I started out with a kind of negative observation years ago, when I first started thinking about this, that we have not capitalized on Adventist theological distinctives when it comes to life in the world and responsibility for the world around us and its resources, and so forth. And I thought that unfortunate. So I thought to myself, well, what is there in typical Adventist thought, Adventist theological thought and history of that thought that we might be able to draw on to be able to create this theological, philosophical basis on which to proceed with tangible action? And so I hit upon this collection of things that I presented to you today as a way of potentially creating that theological basis or identifying that theological basis. What I presented you today is nothing more than those ruminations. Now, maybe like all kinds of bases that you can create, there are flaws in it, there are inconsistencies, there are even things that may not work. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy for someone to come up with an alternative set of Adventist affirmations and so forth that could provide a theological and philosophical foundation for Adventist behavior. I haven't come up with anything at this point, nor has anybody else suggested anything to me. So I put this out there. Actually, I originally put this out there with a title, Towards an Adventist Theology of the Earth, as a call for people to think about this, develop it, or replace it with something else. That doesn't seem to have happened. So I've kind of dropped the towards aspect and simply said, okay, this is what I think can be drawn from Adventist historical thought on theological matters as a basis then for moving ahead with environmental, theoretical, and then eventual practical behaviors. I can't argue that this solves everything, and like most theological systems, they never will solve everything. I mean, even some of the great ones of the New Testament that I mentioned, metaphors of associated with salvation, but they could also be associated with the human predicament, not just the divine response. And a great example is the one dealing with redemption. And when we use the word redemption and all the redemption terms, redeemer and ransom and so forth, as theological terms that I call stained glass window words. They mean sense in a kind of theological environment, in a church environment, in a worship environment. But we forget that they came out of the street environment in the first century. These were words that everybody understood. Redemption had to do with freeing a slave from slavery. The one who freed the slave was the redeemer. What they paid to get the slavery freed was a ransom. So everybody understood this. And they realized that not all of the elements of this social phenomenon could be applied to a religious situation. By the Middle Ages, the theologians had forgotten this, and they argued among themselves as to whom the ransom was paid. Did Jesus pay it to God? Well, that presents a rather theological problematic situation. Well, then did Jesus pay it to the devil? Well, that's even worse. So they couldn't solve it. Well, the reason they couldn't solve it is that question goes beyond the metaphor. So I'm not arguing that this model that I have shared with you today is going to answer all of these questions. But if Adventists are to have a theological basis for some practical behaviors, then we need something like this. Otherwise, it's just simply a Christian model. I think there are inherently within Adventist theological thought a number of things that can form the basis for ecological responsible behavior. And that's what I shared with you. It's nothing more than that. I don't suggest it answers everything. It probably never will. But it is at least something that is Adventist. I mean, one could hardly say that what I presented you today is not Adventist. It is inherently Adventist. Now, will that form the basis of a theological doctrine of the earth? I think so, but it may not. I don't know. I'm fully aware, of course, of the systemic issues. Animals, if we don't have predation and the control of an environment based on self-selection of the population of mosquitoes, for example, by the predation of other insects and birds and what have you. Or, it could be any kind of animal group, that if not part of a systemic control, will overrun and devastate an ecology. Yeah, well, if we clearly see this going on at the point of deterioration, because when Adam and Eve, decided they were naked and they went off and hid from God and so forth, God came back and he created, according to the text, clothes for them, not made out of fig leaves, like are portrayed sometimes in the artwork of depicting the period, but animal skins, it says. Well, you don't get animal skins without killing the animals.
Yeah.
So that automatically then suggests some kind of recognition that death is part of the system.
Right.
Well, if you have then, a certain kind of anatomical structure of teeth and a digestive system and so forth within certain animals that presume preying on other animals and not just eating trees and plants and stuff, then you're going to have to see this as being back in the pristine environment as well, unless something happened to the complete anatomy and physiology of animals from the time of creation to the time after creation. So I don't know the answers to this, but I'm fully aware of the problem, and that it is one that will probably cause us to look at things beyond just the theological framework that we're examining here today. That's all I can really say on this.
All right,
No,
well,
that's
thank you
good.
very much. Thank you for asking your question, Bob. And,
Yes, just on the history of maybe why Adventists have not gotten involved as much as we have. Could it be because of the big problem that happened between E.G. White and Kellogg about pantheism? Because I can remember that there were those that said, if we get too much involved with looking at nature, then we can stray into dangerous ideas like what Kellogg did. Pantheism seems to be always a scare word that is often used. What do you know about that?
Well, I would simply agree. I think that that's certainly a moment in Adventist history that flagged and highlighted that whole thing. But I am not quite so definite as Dave about the non-application of this apocalyptic aspect, that we don't have to pay a lot of attention to the earth. It's going to go up in flames, as in our eschatology, that's going to happen. Maybe I've heard this more than Dave has, but it's certainly not been, the circles that I have functioned in over, well, I hate to say how many years, but a very long time. This has emerged more often than I would like to have seen. So we may not have a doctrine that proposes that kind of thing, but I think there has been an underlying element of this that, and certainly it has been associated with pretty much all apocalyptic movements, that the earth is secondary in all of this, and it's going to be replaced at the end by some kind of divine fiat. I think one needs to have a set of theological ideas that not only recognize that as a position taken by some, but find some way of addressing that issue. The notion, I think, has been too often put out there that we don't need to worry too much about this.
Okay, thank you. I want to go now to Peter. Peter, you've been holding your hand up for quite a while here.
Yes, thank you, Warren, again for your presentation. I like especially the part that is referring to the restoration. That gives us great hope that this planet will be restored in its beauty, the creation, and even more because God will live with his people. And an observation that I like to make is that the importance that God gave to human beings in report with, in relation with everything, the environment that surrounding him. One example is that before the flood, God gave people to eat only fruits and vegetables, but he extended after the flood the meat of animals. That means that God is very much interested, first of all, in the existence of people. And then on the second level is its surroundings. Jesus also reinforced this idea when he is telling his disciples that you are more precious than any birds or anything else. You are the most important thing in God's creation. The thing that didn't hear in your presentation is that you didn't mention anything about the challenges that the increasing population, 8 billion people at this time, it's representing to ecology, how to take care of the ecology. And of course, in my view, the first in importance is that all these 8 billion people to have a piece of bread on their table. And of course, after this, you have to take care of the other things. And my question is, if you can comment a little bit more, if you had something else to add, because you mentioned in your presentation that SDA doesn't have a comprehensive ecological policy.
Well, Peter, thank you for that. I wasn't so much observing that Adventists don't have an ecological policy. I don't know that we need an ecological policy or such.
A comprehensive, you mentioned.
Well, what I'm talking about is a comprehensive theological framework. Policy is down at the point of application and so forth, and it deals with social environments, it deals with political realities and so forth. But do Adventists have a fundamental, foundational theological framework that becomes the basis for us to develop policies, and more importantly, to justify or suggest to us various kinds of behaviors? So I was, I discovered, as I presented to you, a whole series of things starting about 1970, where Adventists began to talk about these things, but not from a particular theological framework. It was mostly from a socioeconomic kind of environment. This came to be in the air. People were starting to think about the environment, think about social responsibility, environmental responsibility, and so forth. And so certain Adventists began to do that. And I tried to chronicle that, tell you a little bit about how this developed. The church then began to respond by that's that paragraph I read to you that says that, you know, we need to be doing various kinds of things, but nothing in that paragraph that came from the General Conference in 3 different statements ever linked the behaviors they were suggesting, never linked any of that to distinctive Adventist theological ideas, particularly systematic ones. So that's what motivated me then to begin thinking, are there concepts, are there ideas within Adventist thought that I can identify and begin to utilize in maybe helping to sketch out what an Adventist theology of the earth would look like? And that such a theology could function as the basis for developing policies, not so much on behalf of the church, except for church institutions and church entities and so forth. To what extent should Adventist colleges, universities, Adventist health systems and so forth have environmental policies? Local churches, and then down to individual people of saying, well, is there a theological basis in addition to the fact that the government is promoting this in some countries, that social groups are promoting it, and that we see that the weather is changing. The water, if you live in Miami, the water is about to overtake the city. Well, of course, you can develop a policy to deal with that, and that's very good. But is there a theological basis, particularly an Adventist one, that would help one, motivate one, along with the deteriorating environment and so forth, to develop behaviors of environmental responsibility? I felt that there are elements. I happen to choose that, cosmic conflict theme, but there may be other things. I decided to hit upon these couple of symbols that one can trace then through that whole cosmic flow, as it were. Now, that whole thing may stand, may be developed by others to serve as a basis of a theological basis for environmental behavior, ethical behaviors, and what have you, or not, as the case may be. I throw it out as something that kind of makes sense to me, and that's all I can really do. But that's not a policy thing. That is a foundational, philosophical, but more particularly theological basis on which a group of people, in this case, a group of people identified as Seventh-day Adventists, could move forward on that basis and develop their own behaviors and policies and so forth that would be undergirded by that. So, we could get down to should you wash out plastic and glass bottles before you put them in the recycle bin? Or should you put them in the recycle bin at all? Well, I'm not into that level of thing. I mean, I do my recycling and so forth, but I'm thinking about, is there a theological basis? And are there ingredients in a historic Adventist thought that could serve as a foundation for these kind of behaviors? I happen to think there is. That's what I've laid out. And I can't really go beyond that then into all the scientific or cultural or specific behavioral things that may emerge out of that. I think we need it. I don't disagree with Dave that maybe what we need is to embrace this model or replace it with something else, or develop from this model in a somewhat different direction. But then to create internal movements that could spill out from the internal to the external on actual behaviors and so forth, like we do with temperance and religious liberty. I would be all for that, of course. I mean, it's kind of like, I got involved, I think Forrest mentioned this the last time I was presenting here, my involvement in, the question of women in ministry, in particular, ordination without regard to gender. Well, I didn't go back and develop all the theological basis for this. This was the work of decades of scholars and church officials and lay people and so forth, thinking about this biblically, thinking about it historically, and so forth. What I lamented was the other end of the spectrum in this case. Nothing had been done about this. I didn't go about creating a theological basis for ordination without regard to gender. That was already there. I determined that what was missing was a political will to make it happen. So I created what was called an OPAC, an Ordination Political Action Committee. Sounds a little strange for a theological group, but that's what was required. What was required was to say, here and now, we are going to do something. And that's what we did. So, I mean, you can come at a question from the purely academic, foundational, theoretical, theological, and so forth, or you can go to the other end and deal with the nitty-gritty of it. In that issue, we dealt with the nitty-gritty. In this one, I'm trying to help us think about a theological foundation that could propel us more consistently towards a certain kind of behavior.
Right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Do you have a quick comment about the challenge of the population increase on the ecology? As a quick comment, if you have.
Well, I mean, that inevitably will, several things. One thing, I suppose, I think it was Bob, I don't know which Bob I'm referring to here, but who raised the question about a system, and the system of predation and the system of self-regulation, as it were, with a population of mosquitoes or mice or brown bears or whatever the case may be. So I think from a systemic point of view, if left to itself, the food systems of the world and the predation of individuals upon each other will probably take care of it. Now, that's a strange way of coming at it, and maybe it's not a theological one at all. Theologically, I suppose, if one were to follow an Adventist understanding or an Adventist theology of the earth, would be the eschatological thing, which is why I was presenting this on an eschatological conference in Rome 4 years ago. And that is, this won't go on forever, because in the divine wisdom, there is a moment at which God comes to intervene. So there is an eschatological answer to that, if one is so inclined. But if left to its own devices, I suppose, then the system of the food systems and the ability of the earth to sustain a certain population that have digestive habits and they require X amount of food, certain kinds of food, and so on. Ultimately, the environment will control the future if left to its own devices. We obviously are not there yet, but maybe we're not that far from it. If you add another 50% to that population, but eschatologically, Christians in general, but Adventists in particular, have had the viewpoint and the belief system that says at some point God intervenes in this, and that no longer becomes an issue. Now, that might become an issue then for the quote, new earth, if you please, so that suddenly now you've got no predation if you don't have, death in the picture. And I'm not arguing that you should or should not, but if that's the case, then what is it that prevents the planet from eventually then in a quote, new earth environment also overtaking itself? Does that
Thank
mean
you.
that,
Thank you.
does that mean that Mars comes into play and half of us are taken there, or a new planet is developed? I don't know. I mean, we don't know anything about that at this point.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
would like to go to McKinley now. McKinley?
Thanks, Forrest. Let's see if we can do this very quickly. Thank you, Dr. Trenchard. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Just by way of feedback, I think the outlines of your paper provide a framework that can inform an Adventist theology of ecology. I think the 5 affirmations that you defined can be powerful motivations for both personal, family, community, and denominational response. The continuum of creation to restoration provides, I think, a basis for practical ecological responsible behavior. But I think an important part of this, though, is that the knowledge of Adventist Christians must be expanded on this topic in order to inform their response. Let's take, for example, in the current topic of climate emissions or climate change, as many people like to characterize it as. Adventist behavior, from one of the talks we had in our class some time ago, with respect to transportation and how they drive, could be informed by this theological framework you propose. And I think it relates to what Dave has in mind with respect to temperance and what was the other thing? Temperance and something else that Dave talked about. But because we tie our health to the salvation implications or expectations, we treat temperance seriously. Similarly, if by the framework that you've provided or defined today, we were to tie our ecological responses to the salvation framework or the restoration framework, then our behavior with respect to the environment could similarly be, I think, effective. So that's just my feedback to what I heard today, but I think you tie together very important elements of Adventist theology that can shape some behaviors.
Thank you for that feedback. Once again, this is a suggested framework. It could be replaced by another framework. It could be amended to include other elements and so forth. I would be very surprised if this is taken seriously, that it would look the same in the future of thinking about this. All I'm trying to do is to start a process, and I've started with a set of theological categories that, not necessarily individually, as I've indicated, but collectively are identified with Adventist thinking and Adventist historical experience and so forth. And could serve as a way of propelling us to think more systematically about this. But thank you for your feedback, and I will certainly consider that.
All right, thank you. Eduardo, to you.
Thank you, Forrest. Warren, I have a concern. I witnessed the St. Gabriel reservoir sediment removal in 2005. I saw the big trucks coming out of the St. Gabriel Reservoir, moving all the debris collected by 60 years. And on the record, they mentioned that they were about 6,100,000 cubic jars of removal. According to FEMA, the Hurricane Katrina carried 40 million cubic jars of debris to the ocean. You don't think that influenced the environment? We should ask God to stop the rain so we don't have this erosion by millions or billions of cubic jars every year and make the ocean rise to the level. But I see on Genesis 8:1 saying, Genesis 8:22, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So, what do you think? I completely deny the climate change. I stay by the word of God. And I don't see how the earth can sustain millions and millions of years of erosion. Can you say something about my comment?
Well, there are aspects of the environment of the earth, let's say the volcanism going on in Hawaii that we seem to see on the news regularly now, that clearly we have no control over. We don't have any direct control over hurricane activity or tornadoes. Here in our area, there was a kind of note that maybe we're going to have some tornadoes here over the weekend. It's a little strange for this region, but that was indicated. I don't know that there's anything I can do this afternoon that will prevent that from happening. But what I do with regard to how much I drive a vehicle around and deposit, carbon materials into the air because I drive to town. I can control a little bit of that. I choose to drive a hybrid vehicle, which is, I think, a responsible thing to do. At some point along the way, I probably will adopt electric technology for vehicles, but I don't think it's quite there that I can be comfortable with it yet. But at some point, if I live long enough, I will certainly be among those who are driving electric vehicles. So I can do some things, and I can do it on the basis of survival. If it might not be affected immediately by survival where I live here right now, but as a part of the population of the earth, I'm trying to be responsible in certain kind of behavior because of the potential for survival of the whole of humanity. And what everyone does contributes a little bit to that. And part of this is a mindset saying, well, do I accept my part in all of this? Do I accept my stewardship of this, and so forth? Well, that begins to get one into ethical and theological realms and potential religious realms. And so what I'm saying is there anything about our Adventism that could, from a theological perspective, inform my behavior as a citizen of the world and to inculcate in me a kind of responsibility that can lead to action of some sort? I may not be able to control things at a macro level or do anything at this point that will prevent volcanism going on in Hawaii. But if everybody contributes to some kind of behavior that lessens the carbon footprint, we may have some impact as a human population on the planet. We may have some impact on the future. Now, I think that has to be kept in perspective, but human responsibility that is based on religious experience is important. And if one recognizes the divine element in this and the divine stewardship given to humans and trusteeship, then it will inculcate a certain philosophy and a certain kind of behavior. That's all I can say.
Warren, can I have 10 seconds? In
10
the
seconds.
miracle of the fishes and bread, you think that imply some fishing and some harvesting? The miracle of Jesus of multiplying the fishes and bread, you think that imply some fishing and some harvesting?
I don't know. I mean, if it was truly a miracle, then I suppose all of this material could suddenly have appeared there. But you're quite right. If it was, if the fish and the bread came from the normal processes, then yes, fish would have to be caught, and bread would have to be made from harvested grains and so forth. One that might, I suppose, not be quite so dramatic is when Jesus said he was answering the question about paying the Roman tax, and he said, "Well, bring me a fish," and in the fish's mouth, there came out, he had found this coin that had Caesar's image on it, presumably. So I don't know. I mean, that I don't know what's going on there in terms of miraculous behavior, or if it's just simply that somebody caught a lot of fish and some people made a lot of bread and they suddenly became available to people on the side of the hill that day.
Okay, thank you.
That was for the Adam and Eve.
I've got to go on, Eduardo, to someone else
That's
now.
okay. That's okay.
Okay, I'm going to go to Simona here in just a second. It'll be our last one, and we'll cut it off at that. And just before I go to Simona, Warren, I just wanted to mention to you that when you said the Fifth Dimension being a contemporary music group, not anymore.
No, I understand that.
A lot of us, well, it was contemporary, but no.
Yeah, thank you. The moment I said it, contemporary didn't seem to apply. Yeah.
It kind of ages us. Okay, I want to go to Simona now, and this will be our last one. Thank you, Simona.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. I just have maybe just two brief thoughts. So one, you very often speak of human rebellion in your paper, and I don't think there was a human rebellion. The rebellion came from a different source. We are pretty much victims in that entire story, which is why we are being redeemed. And second, you say that there will be a restoration, will return the earth to the pristine environment. I'm not sure that is really true. A pristine in which way? Because, if you have a memory of everything that happened, it is no longer pristine. So it may look perfect, the memory of the wages of sin, if I can use that term, you know, of the death and suffering and everything else that happened, will make it not pristine. There is a scar left behind, just there as there will be remains to be a scar on the hands of Jesus, you know, to remind the universe of the sacrifice. There will be a scar in memory of everything that happened, so that it cannot happen again. Thank you.
Well, once again, let me just remind everybody, I found these theological themes within Adventist thought. And that includes, you know, and once one decides to explore the cosmic conflict, the great controversy theme, or whatever we call it, one encounters all of these ingredients. I simply made it somewhat alliterative, not in the beginning of the words, but in the end. Creation, you probably noticed this, deterioration, salvation, anticipation, and restoration. So that was my deliberate terminology, but it represents the flow of that set of concepts that form the Adventist understanding of the cosmic conflict. And I was looking for an Adventist construct that I could draw on. So that's the one I drew on. I'm not in every case suggesting that I would enunciate every element of those ingredients in the same way. And I don't disagree with you about some ways of understanding some of those, like the deterioration aspect, who's responsible for it, and, you know, what are its elements and so forth. I mean, there's a set of biblical texts that deal with this, and in my paper, though, I've tried to represent those in the notes and so forth. So that's one thing, but I appreciate your reflection on it. As to pristine, again, this is part of the construct that I was working with. And yes, it would not deny memory, and memory can go in different directions. I chose to emphasize the positive aspect, that it would be, it ultimately is not just restoration, but the way Adventist thought on this goes is that it creates a sort of post-pristine or whatever environment in which the memory of salvation, the memory of God's act in Jesus of Nazareth, is one that would not have been part of the system at the beginning of it all, you know. So yeah, I mean, memory can go in different directions. There's a memory of the negative and aspects of things, but also the memory of elements that have come into this whole trajectory that weren't there from the beginning. But yeah, I mean, what part does the negative aspect of memory play? I'm sure it has some to do with that.
Okay, thank you. David, I'm going to turn to you for the final comments. And thank you very much, Warren, for your presentation and your answers in this discussion. David, to you.
Thank you, Forrest, and thank you very much, Warren. We put you on late and worked you hard, and I hope now you have a good Sabbath rest. This has been very, very rich for us, and we thank you. I want to thank also Forrest, Hal, and Monty Butler, and Bronwyn Larson particularly. These three have sort of kept things going, particularly Bronwyn, I should say. there's been a lot of back and forth trying to correct my mistake, and I really appreciate the work these people have done. Now, I'd like to make just a few comments and then we'll quit. One of them is that when it comes to theological development, one model is that we begin with the abstract theories and then move down to the practical. Or another model is that we begin with the practical and move to the theoretical. As Rauschenbusch said, we already have a social gospel. Now we need to develop a theology that emerges from the actual thing. A third one would be back and forth between the theoretical and the practical. And I think that's what we would want to have happen. Secondly, Roy Branson introduced a distinction between Millerite way of thinking and Adventist way of thinking. Now, he was not using these terms historically or chronologically, but he was saying a Millerite way of thinking is one that expects Jesus to come almost any moment. But an Adventist way of thinking is to say, well, we have this hope, but we don't know when it's going to be realized. Meanwhile, we're going to build institutions. We're going to try to improve the world we're in. So that difference, I think, is helpful when we think about eschatology and ethics. Thirdly, predation. I think we need to have to, Bob Ford, I think, has brought up the right issue, and I think we have to bite the bullet on that issue. And by that, I mean, I think we need to say predation is part of God's plan for this sinful world. Does not mean that predation was part of God's original plan, but it is God's plan for this world. Were it not for predation, life would not be possible in this sinful world. So now, in the earth made new, presumably it's symbiotic, but that's not the ecology we live in. So instead of shying away from predation, I think we should embrace it. And then the next thought I'd like to make is that this idea of sanctuary is a very rich one, and we should develop it. We should develop it more expansively through the Bible, not just one or two texts, but what does the Bible as a whole say about this? And we should expand it through our lives. Bob Ford said during the break that some of the people who first got our national parks going were people who talked about sanctuary, the need for sanctuaries for the people of the United States and the world. So now, finally, I think we need a society for Adventist ecologists, and I've been talking about this long enough. I think the year 2023 is a good year to get started. And I wish there was someone more qualified than me to do this, but if no one else will step forth, I will. And I think the society should have four purposes. One of them is mutual support amongst those Adventists who are working in this area from wide variety of disciplines. Secondly, I think this society should try to influence denominational policy on these matters. Thirdly, I think this society should try to have an impact on public policies. And fourth, I think it should have an impact on theological development. So think of a square, equilateral square, each of these being as important as the other. And I hope that I can recruit people to get this going. Maybe this is a last contribution we can make to the life of the church and to the life of the world. And I hope there will be people better than me who will lead out. But if I'm the only one, I will do it. So here is the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Dave, if I could just respond just briefly to that.
Sure.
If something tangible like you ended with here before your benediction emerges out of this, it would be it would certainly embody an outcome of my thinking on this for a long time in a way that I could never have imagined. So thank you for that.
Okay, we need to make good on this. It's easy to make resolutions just before Christmas, but the day after New Year's, it seems a little easy to forget them. But we must leave something in this area as one of the last things of our legacy, one of the last things of the baby boomers' legacies, and we will try to get others involved. But let's get something going. I hope Bob Ford is still on board and has heard what I have to say. Because-
Bob, I don't see Bob on here
No,
now.
I'm
Oh, there you
still
are. Okay.
here. I'm still here and I 100% support you. I'll sign up and help out.
Okay, let's do it. I was just thinking, let's have an annual conference. We all fly to Miami, right? What could be less ecological than us flying from all over the world to a society of Adventist ecologists? We can't do that. Fortunately, at this time, we have Zoom and similar technology, so we could have quarterly meetings, which at the very least would enable us to know who is doing work in this area in all the various academic disciplines and be of mutual support to each other. And then we might go beyond that. We should have a little newsletter, but all of the things that organizations do, if I can just keep at it, voluntary organizations are of this sort or how things move forward. Tocqueville, when he came from France to look at the United States, he said, the reason why this works is that they have all these societies working. Roy Branson wrote his dissertation on Talcott Parsons, whose theory, political theory, was on voluntary association. So this is something that's proven to work. Any other way of doing it doesn't work. So let's get busy. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody. Anybody else want to say something before we close off?
No,
Only if Dr. Trenchard can afford to stay around for like 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know what he has in mind, but we'll appreciate
Okay.
that. No requirement, only if you can.
Okay, I'm signing off.